Hey, this is going to be a very, very, very simple one today. So if you are an expert and you've already painted the things like the whales and the boats and a little bit of everything, this is going to seem so simple. But I do feel with watercolor, sometimes getting back to the basics, you can learn a ton. So here is today's. It's actually a piece of the mountain. You can see this is what the next one will look like. But we're kind of filling these mountains. And actually, this right here is another mountain as well. This is a real mountain as seen. So we're going to do just a really, really, really simple 3-layer technique here. And let's see how this all works. So we're going to start by basically doing a dark layer and then just letting the water pull it down. And we can try a couple different versions here. Let's start with adding just a little bit of whatever you call it, adding a little bit of pigment to the top, paint, and then we're going to add water and let it pull down. And then we'll test out some different ones, maybe adding water first and then paint to the top. But it's going to be a very, very, very simple one. But let's just jump into it so it has a bit of time to dry. Here we go. Just touching up with a little bit of water here I got. And I'm thinking probably mixing up something that's a little bit darker on the top, but maybe not something that's green or blue. Maybe something that's almost even a little bit more brown because we're gonna kind of be going more into this alpine. So I'm gonna grab just maybe a touch of brown or something, and then maybe a little bit of purple. Just a touch right there. Let that kind of soak in. Just check to make everything is good. Okay, there we go. A little bit of this. And so I'm going to just add a little bit of a layer right up here. Just seeing how I like it. Nothing like starting with paint right on a fresh sheet of paper. Maybe I'll touch in a bit more purple. And then we're going to add just a stripe of water here right below. So I need a bit darker maybe. How's this? Whoop, going over my edge. That's right. I'll show you how to fix that in 1 second. So got something like that, and then rinsing off the brush. There's just water right here, and just adding a little bit right there, making sure that it touches both the paint itself, that brush stroke, and gets over the line. All I need. And I'm just going to leave that right there. Okay, we just did 1/3 of this painting. I told you, this is going to be a wild one. Already making a bit of you can see I put a little bit of a dot right over here. You can just easily mop that up. It takes nothing. Super simple, really simple and easy one. But it's the simplest thing, but these techniques are really, really, really useful because they kind of remind you things that you'll do 10, 15, 20, 30 times in the course of a larger painting, and it's all just hundreds of little brush strokes put together, but this is almost like practicing your form if you're a rower or a runner or something like this. And so by having the paint up first and then the water down below, you are going to get a different feel than if you did water first and then paint. What that different feel is, I can't always tell you because I don't always know myself, but you'll see it's already starting to do some interesting stuff right here. So there's one. I might just mop up a little bit of water right now. And why I always say you want to go kind of across the line is because if you paint right up to the edge, it's gonna, well, here, let's see if I can show you. It's gonna feel different. I should have some, just grabbing all the scrap paper. I think I made this for a piece of our film. But if you paint like right up to the edge of the line, you're gonna have this little bit of just a tiny bit of an edge right here. So the difference, that's some water there. The difference, maybe you can see it, is the water is like it's going to kind of sit on that edge. You almost have this slightly harder edge. So if you want that effect, that's great. But if you kind of want it to feel like a mountain that's going back down, here's a better example here. So you can see sort of this is strong edge right at the corner. But if you were to take something from the middle, you'd have a much less strong edge. And that's kind of what I'm aiming for with this one. You can already see you got some strange, kind of interesting effects, a little bit more blobby. So next we're going to try one where we add the water first and then the paint into it. And maybe that's something that you prefer. Okay. And this is kind of a fun technique for mountains. It's a really great one to try too. I know I'm talking a lot as well for something that is more or less 3 layers, but it's a really fun technique for mountains. All you need is just kind of these little jagged lines, almost like torn paper. And you're going to start with just some paint on the top, and then you kind of fade them down so it almost feels like mist in between the valleys. If you want to try it on your own, give it a go. Find a local mountain range or maybe some hills, sketch them out so you have the right line length, and then just do this technique. Maybe this one would be a sky if you want the sky to be blue on top, but then just start kind of dark on the top of this line and then find some way to pull it down, and it is one of like it is watercolor at its best, really. Okay. I'm gonna give that just a few more seconds to dry because I don't want this to kind of bleed up into the rest of the mountain, but it should just take a moment. Now something kind of cool too, if you wanted to, well, it's barely still a little bit wet, you can add a drop or two of water, and you'll see it's gonna bloom. It's gonna kind of push it down in a really cool way. But this is so hard to get the right technique. Oh, you can see it moving there, because if it's purely dry, it'll just kind of sit on top and then almost like a pock mark. Whereas right now, it's kind of an interesting look. If you like how yours looks, don't do this to it. I often find I like something and I'll add water to it and ruin it. But in just a second, we're going to dive into layer number 2. Now, with really simple things like this one, and we're going to get a chance next time, right here, this is also kind of a simple one. We're going to try some different techniques. And I'm thinking next time we're actually going to bring some salt into it. So if you've ever been curious about using salt in watercolor, there's a couple little techniques that we can do, but we'll send an email about it beforehand. So if you're not in the newsletter already, definitely be sure to join that. But the salt side of things is really interesting. But there are way cool things as well. And if you're interested in doing any of these, just let me know. But like this right here is called this is oxgall, and this right here is incandescent medium. And there's all kinds of things like this you can actually add to your watercolors. You basically just put a drop of this right here, mix it in there, and it totally changes the properties. Watercolor feels super basic, and that's because it is. This is like stuff they'd use in the Egyptian times. So it doesn't seem like much has changed, but there are simple little things like this that can do some pretty cool stuff. And I'll tell you about that in a second here after we get our next layer down. This is feeling decently dry to me. So I'm going to add some water this time to our bottom layer. So last time, just, a little bit of paint on top and then water, kind of blocky. You get some interesting effects, but not super controlled. Now I'm going to add water below and just kind of let it soak in. Order of operations with watercolor is really important. And if this ever feels boring to you, what I suggest is try doing 2 of these the same thing. I've often said with some of these paintings, like try going a second time. If you want something really fun and you don't quite know where to start or you're not sure what to paint, just make a shape, do something like this, and see what happens when you try to do it the same way. Or I've seen some really cool things where maybe you do 4 in very different ways. Try to make the same painting in 4 very different ways. This is the kind of stuff where you learn so much. It's like this is where real art happens. And then you take it somewhere pretty and you'll make something gorgeous, but like this is where it happens. So I put a lot of water right here, and I'm kind of letting that soak in, just honestly, just for a couple seconds, maybe 10, 15 seconds. It doesn't take too long. And then you're going to have paper that's wet for about 2 minutes, maybe tops. And once it's kind of soaked in, that's when we can kind of add this layer of paint on top. And then when it touches, this has something to hold on to. It's kind of like somebody who has their feet planted versus somebody who doesn't. With this one, I'm thinking it's going to be something, maybe I could do brown. Maybe I'll mess around with some other colors, maybe a bit more purple. Let's try brown. Let's give that a go. Kind of a nice oaky brown. Maybe I'll add in a touch of green here toward the edge. We'll start with some brown. Once again, just checking, seeing how wet things are. They're a little wet, but it's not too big of an issue. I might just double check here. The safety tissue. And then, I can't help it, I'll just put a touch more purple in there. All right, here we go. We did kind of purple brown, and now we're doing brown purple. And so I'm going right over the edge, just working to make sure that little line is in good shape. And then I'm touching this to that wet edge right there. And you're not going to see a lot fast. It's going to be kind of slow when you go dry to wet as opposed to wet to dry. Or I suppose wet to wet. It's all wet to wet really here, but this version seems like it's the same stuff, but it's everything is different. It's like coffee, It's all the same. It's beans and water and milk, but the what comes first, the order of operations, how you decant them, all that stuff makes an enormous difference. There we go, a little bit right there, and then maybe I'll even add a touch more, grabbing some of that purple now, maybe even a bit of indigo or something to mix with that brown. I'm gonna get that top edge just a little bit darker. There we go, a bit more pigment. And I'm just gonna get this top edge just a bit more dark, just because I want to. It's kind of nice because you don't have to like hit that line perfectly anymore. It doesn't need to be this like perfect right along the edge because it's already kind of wet, so it kind of knows where to go. There we are. Sometimes with big mountains too, depending on like how shade I want them, it's not like universal. Sometimes it is, depending on how it looks, but it's almost like they have, a little bit of shadow here or there. And I'll just kind of make sure to add a little bit more pigment, or if I'm using a darker pigment, I'll just kind of fill some in right here. I don't want it to be real like exact or something, but just putting a little bit more on one side of the mountain, knowing where that sun's going to come from, that is sometimes just enough. So there we go, just a little bit like that. And you'll see it's starting to do its thing just a little bit here, and over the next second or two, you'll really start to see that. Just right there. It's simple, but that's what these things are made out of. So you can already start to see these blooms are doing some interesting stuff up here. Now, when it comes to all the textures of watercolor, there's a couple different ways to do this. And if you have any questions too, definitely feel free to reach out to us, or something that we can kind of share more about. You just kind of pick this stuff up naturally doing a bunch of paintings, but in so many ways, watercolor is all about these little textures, these little granular things, and sometimes it's in the paint, and sometimes it's somewhere else. So these right here, so let me grab some paint here. Right here is just a few paints, real kind of selection. There's boxes and boxes and boxes of these, which I can't fit under the camera right now. But there are some really interesting paints that do some cool stuff when it comes to texture. For instance, let's see if I can actually find it. There's a Daniel Smith one. It's not this, but there's one called Moon Glow. Maybe this is it right here. Oh, it's close. Anyway, it looks kind of like this. But Daniel Smith makes some really interesting kind of granulated pigments there's one called Moon Glow. And these are just paints which are compact, it's basically a pigment and a binder and all of that stuff. And there's some that will granulate in a really wild way. It makes it look like a riverbank or mud in a good way, like good mud. And so there's some that just naturally do this really interesting drying pattern. There's lots of types of paint, a lot of natural ones. The Art of Soil is a really cool brand that does a great job kind of creating stuff naturally out of these pigments. And so that means that basically every brush stroke you do, you'll have this really interesting effect. Like I said earlier, there's these kind of things. This right here will basically make things pearlescent. You just add a little bit of this, like a drop right here, and then you swirl it around. It basically makes your paint shiny. There are paints that have it built in as well. And then there's this. Now, this is really interesting. This is called ox gall. This is a Holbein one, but lots of companies make it. It's called ox gall because it used to come from the gallbladder of an ox. We make gallbladders are called gallbladders. So they make something called gall. I'm not quite sure what it does in the human body, but what it does in things like this is it makes them not dry quickly. So you get this, right there is a little bit of blockiness as it kind of connects with the water. If you put just a drop of this ox gall on your palette and then mixed in with that color, it would just keep on flowing and flowing and flowing and flowing. So if you want something that is really big sheet of paper that goes all over the place and like a perfect translucent sky and just no sharp edges, this stuff can work really well. And just in case you're worried, this is, I think, vegan ox gall. I don't think they take it from the gallbladder of oxes anymore, but you can check that on the label. But Whether you want things a little bit sharper or a little bit more textured or a little bit more anything, there's all these wild kind of things. And next week, we're going to use salt, and I'll show you how that affects things as well. But let's take a quick look because there's a ton you can do just with paint and paper as well. Honestly, a lifetime worth. So we've got some really interesting kind of soft layers. Compared to these ones, which kind of give us these hard blocky edges when you used water first. Look at this. How cool is that? We got these nice soft layers. And if you want to add a little bit of water, if you want those blooms, you'll see these ones were kind of aggressive. You almost have that paint on top and it's really moving. If you want to add blooms on this one, you get a much, much, much more connected version. And what this is telling me, and you can take it with a grain of salt, or you can take it with literally with a grain of salt next week, is that if you can, when it comes to these, if you can add your water first and let it soak in compared to kind of paint on top, it gives you a bit more of a complex feel, which is just kind of fun. But like I said, we're just kind of working on form today. It's all about that. It's all about that kind of play, and you might discover something really, really fun as well. So with the next two of these, I think it is, we'll do salt with this one, and then the next one, if there's another technique you want to see, whether it's watercolor pencil or something strange like this or a different kind of paint, just let me know and we can kind of discover a little bit together. Okay, so now we're still waiting for this little bit. I'm actually going to dry off the edges just a touch so it buys us a little bit more time. And I'm going to go check to see if anybody has any questions, because in so many of these things, if you have a question, you're not the only one. There's a lot of people who probably have a question just like that as well. But it's also a good reason why sometimes I will work on 2 or 3 paintings at once, which sounds really fancy, like, those chess game people who are like doing 2 or 3 games, all at the same time. When it comes to watercolor, it's just a matter of timing. So if you have a really big painting, you're always working on a piece or another while it's drying, and it can be pretty stressful. But I love little stuff like this because you can basically get 3 of them is probably the ideal. 3 of them go in at once. And while you're waiting for this, patiently waiting for this layer to dry, you're working on another thing, and you can kind of juggle in that way. 3 little balls as opposed to trying to kind of move one giant boulder. Okay, no major questions, but that is all good. Probably a lot of people painting. If you do have any questions, though, definitely reach out on Trailbound Sketches on Instagram. We're also on Blue Sky, all the other things. And we have a really fun Discord channel. We're slowly kind of getting more into that. But as we kind of pick that up, it's been a really cool community. And then our newsletter, we're finally kind of really filling that out with some fun stuff. And this next couple batches, we're kind of finally getting into some big adventures. So it's kind of fun to share all of those things in that way. So if anything does pop into your head, don't keep it to yourself. Let us know. It's really fun to kind of hear, and this helps give us a sense of what people might be interested in. Okay, so this one's getting close. And for this last one, this is where it'll be kind of fun and interesting. It's all of a matter of matching this color to this. And you can kind of see this is kind of some of that pigmentation right here. You can kind of see just a little bit. You're getting a touch. That's what it feels like with the things like moon glow. And actually, why don't I go dig that out just so I can kind of show you, because it's really fun to, especially simple paintings, you can just kind of see how the textures all work out, whereas it might get kind of lost in something bigger. So I'm gonna go dig that out, just put a swatch on something so you can see how it works. Nothing like digging through boxes of paint on Alive. If you actually want to see, this is the mess that is happening right now. It's somewhere in here. I couldn't figure out if I wanted to go like color by color, but I only have 6 boxes in this tea box, which has worked pretty well. So I've got like a purple one. There we go, moon glow. Okay, we got it. But yeah, I always find cigar boxes and things like that. I'm sure there's like dedicated watercolor paint storage, but there's nothing better than just jumping on a line at Goodwill or something and finding something that fits perfect. Okay, so this is moon glow right here, and I'm going to quickly just grab a blank sheet of paper, and I'm just going to swatch out just a touch for you. So here is a little bit of Moon glow right under the page. I'm going to give you 2 dots so you can see what happens when it mixes with other stuff. And there's lots and lots of pigments like this. Like I said, Art of Soil, Daniel Smith, I assume Winsor Newton and Holbein and all the rest are making them because they're really fun. But this is kind of what old school watercolor would have been like too, because you would have been using just, you know, mud and whatever pigments you could find. So you'd probably get a lot more of this granulation, but it's fun that people are coming back to it. So I got a little bit of water here, and then I'm just going to pull in some of this. This is kind of what I do for a general swash. I give a really, really good, there we go. So that's just what a brushstroke would look like. And here's what happens when you mix it. And you can see this one is this interesting kind of purpley texture with all this other stuff. And you can see there's actually a couple of different colors in there, which is another cool thing with these granulated pigments. There's a lot more science behind this that I do not know. But if you're looking for a fun way to lose a lot of money, this is a really great way to do it. If I won the lottery, you wouldn't know, but I would just have a whole bunch more paint. That's the main change. Maybe we'd even get into the cat. Okay, so we got this, and then here is the second one, but I'm going to mix this with a brown. So here's a burnt sienna right here. Just kind of connect it in. Not granulated or anything like that. It's just a plain color. And mixing this up real good. Swishing stuff out so I get some decent water, and I'm just going to let those two play. There we go, just like that. And I'm going to place this, maybe we'll do one more just to see how this looks. I'm going to place this by the heater, and we'll check this out here in 1 second once we finish this. Okay, back to the textures. Now you can kind of see how fun is this. We've got a little bit of moves from what I put there, and the purple and the brown are kind of breaking apart. Anyway, kind of letting the watercolor do its thing, but this is fun. I'm learning a ton, and that's kind of what I'd say half of my watercolors are like. 10% of the really wild paintings, maybe 40% are wild paintings that don't turn out, and the other 50, stuff like this. But if you're having fun, it counts as painting. At least that's what my wife says, which she has to say a lot because I'm so neurotic about this stuff. All right, so time for our final little mountain here. Just check in. Dry enough. Let's give it a go. And I'm going to try to match right here. So it looks like I got a bit of purple, bit of blue, bit of green. And the reason I didn't make these green and blue and all that is we just have a lot of green and blue, and I want a bit of contrast. So here is a touch of this blue right here. I'll grab some of this, a little bit in there. I'm going to kind of paint in all these base colors, and then I'm going to add a nice strong kind of cap to it all. So here we go, a couple base colors. We're kind of making this a palette. Maybe a bit of green in here. It's not a homogeneous thing either. It's not like it'll all be the same. You can even see on here where there's purple and brown, they kind of got pushed in their own little piles too. You'll see it here in a second once it's dry. But it's kind of fun how water gets just these complexities. They kind of get lost sometimes when you're in the field. But this little practice time, this is where it all kind of comes to light. That's why it's so important to do simple things, especially the ones where you're okay that it doesn't turn into something beautiful. That's why a messed up painting can actually be one of the best things you ever make, because that could be where you learn the technique that helps you make your favorite painting. Those beautiful ones that kind of come together, they never happen on their own. No person is an island, and no painting happens solo. And that's kind of good to remember too, because if you can make something good, you can do it again. That being said, that's a lesson I need to learn, because I often just get terrified that it's like, that was the one, that was all of it. But process of painting, if you can do it. All right, a couple more little bits here. Adding some indigo, adding some green, kind of just trying to color match until it feels right. But don't forget, whatever you're painting here is going to turn lighter. When it dries, it's going to be lighter. So if you want something dark, if you want it to match, you got to make it extra dark. Kind of a hard thing to wrap your head around and do. Sometimes it works, sometimes it is just dark and you're stuck. But let's see, something like that. We'll give it a go. Okay, and then a little bit of water. Kind of just put the garnish on this painting, so to speak. Let it do all of its stuff. And then maybe just a touch of some dark stuff up here. And I really like to kind of add a lot of this. Oops, I'm breaking all kinds of lines here. That's fine. Oh, I'm losing my tissue paper. Bit of a mess day, but that's okay. Now I really like to kind of add the contrast right at the end. You can kind of see, it feels like a mountain sort of, but I want to break these two apart. So here's some indigo, here's some purple, nice and dark, right over to the edge here, hoping that it's not too wet. But then by adding just like a real nice kind of dark line, especially one that can flow into this lighter stuff, we know we match the bottom, and then whatever kind of shapes this makes is what needs to be there. Kind of leaving it up to the painting. There we go. Just like that. Beautiful. The fun thing too is like an old film camera or something. We do not know what this is going to look like until it is dry. So I have a little tiny heater here in the Shedio, and I'm just going to pop this right in front and just tape this down, and then we'll see what this looks like in a second. But let's check out this moon glow. I feel like Julia Child or something with one of these ovens. So here is some kind of baked moon glow, and if you look, these granulated paints, they're really interesting because that bloom, look at the contrast with that water. Same down here. This is when it just mixed with just something normal, right? Like a burnt sienna. Look at those wild patterns. Sorry, this is like in the camera, but look at those wild patterns. It's chaotic, it's high contrast, but it's kind of fun if that's an element you're looking for. If you're trying to make like a photorealistic, exact painting, maybe don't go with any of these granulated things. They are unpredictable, but in one of the coolest ways. And what's extra cool is the reason they work. So this looks like a river delta, right? Something maybe you see from a plane window or even one of those NASA space photos. And the crazy thing is it is. So river deltas, like they look like that because the sediments filter out as it takes more and more like energy to carry the particles of the water out, they start to filter out, and that's where you get all these shapes and colors and everything. And it's exact same for these little tiny things where it's just mud and water, which is really all watercolor is. So pretty cool stuff. This one is just moon glow, but tons of granulated paint out there. Of course, there's things like oxgall and luminescence and mask and salts and all the fun stuff. And then you can also spend an entire lifetime just trying to figure out whatever watercolor you have in your palette. But sometimes the little simple things are how you learn a ton, which is so fun. So without further ado, let's go see how this looks. Actually, one second. Let's see if there's any questions. Not seeing anything major. Okay, let's see if this is dry enough. Okay. And here is today's. Much less contrasty. See, that's the lack of granulation, but it means that you have full control over what is happening. And you can kind of tell there is a big difference between wet first and then paint, or paint first and then wet. And it's really all just some practice. Not the wildest thing I've ever painted, but I learned some lessons. Even after painting so much, you always learn a little bit of a lesson, and let's see how it looks. Yeah, that fits in just fine. Next time, we're going to be trying to do some of the same with salt, which is kind of a natural way to get some really interesting texture. So slowly, piece by piece, the big picture is coming. Some of the days are going to be really complex. Some of them aren't. But if you have any questions about any of this, definitely reach out and feel free to share yours as well. Even the really simple things, it's kind of fun to show people that it doesn't have to all be, like rowing boats and whales and stuff like that. Sometimes watercolor is things like this, and it can be really therapeutic and fun and easy. And I think not nearly enough people show and do that. So if you want to be one of those, definitely let people know. Maybe you might even get some first-time painters in there and you could paint it forward.